So greetings, everyone. Thank you, Samantha, for the introduction. Thank you to the APB. And thank you to the White House for holding this session today. I am Mike Abramowitz, and I direct the Genocide Prevention Program at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And we were very honored today to have the President make his very significant announcement at the museum. The President toured the museum with Elie Wiesel, and he was very moved. You could tell both men from their remarks today. I wanted to just say, I know that some of you may be in from out of town. We actually, my colleague Sarah Weissman, who might raise her hand is somewhere back there, has some tickets for the museum for if you're around tomorrow and wanted to come by. You can beat the lines with these tickets. So if you've never seen the museum, I would urge you, because the lines are very long these days. And we also have something we do every month, which is an interview with a survivor, which is going to take place tomorrow at 1 o'clock, and I would encourage you to come see that too. I also just wanted to take the moderator's purview to mention two names that weren't mentioned, which I just would like to have a little bit of a shout out to Secretary Albright and Secretary Cohn. Secretary Albright and Secretary Cohn are both passionately committed to the cause of genocide prevention, and they were the chairs of the Genocide Prevention Task Force at the museum, and USIP, American Academy of Diplomacy, convened, and I think a number of the ideas that came out of, from the President's mouth today were ideas that were hatched in the Genocide Prevention Task Force. So what we heard today was a lot of talk about structures. We heard about a new Atrocities Prevention Board that is going to run an interagency process. They'll be meeting every month, and structures and processes are very important. But you also have to have political will to use these structures. And you also have to have pressure and also education and efforts that are really aimed at a broader public to try to influence this process. And I think it was interesting to hear the President talk today, because he seemed to me to really invite this kind of pressure. He was, I think, inviting people in civil society and the broader public to really try to do what we can to really bring public attention, to speak out, as Elie Wiesel talked about, and to really get the government to use these tools. Because unless the government actually uses these tools, then we're not going to be successful in creating a world without genocide. And so I think that's where people in this audience come into play, and that's where people on our panel come to play. At the museum, our focus is really on education and on imparting the lessons of the Holocaust to our visitors, both online and in cyberspace. We have increasing a lot of visitors online. And so we have a great panel today to really talk about some of the ways that different groups are trying to raise awareness and to mobilize networks on behalf of genocide prevention. And so I know a number of these people, they're great speakers. My good friend Omer here, I'm going to let him to go first. I'm going to just say one thing. I'm going to ask my panelists to just talk for a few minutes so that we can really have a conversation, and we're going to have questions from the blogosphere too, apparently, and from the audience too. So Omer works at the Enough Project, which is doing a great job on both Sudan and on Democratic Republic of Congo, and I'd like Omer to say a few words.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks to the White House and all of you for being here. Samantha, we really appreciate your work. You've been a champion of this through the years, and we are honored with your colleagues and everybody there at the board. This has been a dream, and we all wanted to see something like this happen. We wanted to see the toolbox, as this is called, expanded, and more people coming in to work. Yes, individually, we all have that passion. Individually, we want to do more. However, to institutionalize this and to get all the agencies together to work on it. I mean, this is a dream come true for some of us who've been in the front lines and working on this issue for the longest time. This morning, I had the pleasure of watching one of the champions of this issue, President Obama, at the Holocaust Memorial Museum, talking about this. He said something very profound, and of that wonderful speech, I came out with a few sentences, but one of them remained with me, and hear what he said, and I quote, "Remembrance without resolve is a hollow gesture." And this is how we can get that resolve, and this is how we can make that remembrance mean something. Because I came from the region of Darfur. There was where I was born and raised, and you have seen through the years, 9 years of atrocities. Something unique happened in Darfur, and in this movement against genocide and mass atrocities and war crimes. That one of them is, for the first time maybe in history, we caught this and we called it the rightful name, genocide, while it was ongoing. And unfortunately, I report to you today, that is still going. And the second thing is that we indicted a sitting president. It never happened before. These are things that happened while we all here, and we all watched this. However, some of us think that very little had been done. Yes, a lot had been done behind the scenes, and a lot of these people who we met today did not just happen to spring up yesterday, or getting up this morning and the president say, you guys are on this board. No, they've been champions of this, they've been working diligently to do this. However, the woman that I met a few years back in a place like Arikasoni camp, and you were there, Samantha, and you've seen it, and many of you, and the president himself, when he visited the refugees in Chad, had seen. This woman was blind, and she was over 70 years old, and she was taking care of 8 grandchildren that both their parents, who were her children, died in this war, killed in the war. How can I tell her that for 9 years we couldn't get her back home, or punish those people who did this? Or the women today with their children running from the atrocities of Sudan that are happening as we speak, and hiding behind mountains, hills and rocks, and some of these people who couldn't even find a day ration. How can we tell them that the world is doing business as usual, and we can do something? Today we have an answer, and today we can say with confidence that we are on the right track to bring these guys home. We are on the right track to end this. Not only that, we are on the right track to say that never again is never again, hopefully. My last thing is to say that also the president said national sovereignty does not mean a license to kill your own people. And that is profound. The likes of Kony and Omer Bashir and those people who perpetrate these atrocities, your days are numbered. And this people, this task force, and us, all of us out there are coming after you. And there is no way for you to hide. Elie Wiesel this morning said something very profound as well. He said, if the Allied forces took out these trains and the transportation lines where people were transported from Hungary and from Poland and elsewhere in Germany to the gas chambers, we couldn't. History would have been different. Yes, and we are living history today. One day, all of us present here and those outside who hear our words, we are going to be asked of what we have done to stop this madness. I want us all to be able to have the courage to look those people in the eye and say, we were there, and we are proud to report to you that we have done something about it. Thank you very much.
So our next speaker is Monique Beadle from Falling Whistles, which is doing some very innovative things to try to advance peace in Eastern Congo. And Monique, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. 18 years ago, I sat in the passenger side of my mother's hatchback listening to an NPR story about Hutus and Tutsis in a country that I'd never heard of, and something about how there was going to be a genocide and they were going to pull out peacekeepers, and my mother said, and President Clinton isn't going to do a damn thing about it. And I watched the blood drain from her face. She's the oldest child of 2 Holocaust survivors, and it was like her nightmare was on repeat in real time. So Rwanda was all we talked about for the next 100 days, and 800,000 murders later, the crisis ended. Or did it? What really happened was that Rwanda's genocide simply spilled over the border into Congo. Soon, 8 African armies were fighting Rwanda's war on Congo's soil, and now, 18 years since Rwanda's genocide, 5.4 million Congolese people have died, and their blood cries out from the ground. Now, the cheap and costless and painless options that the US could have and should have pursued to stop this violence have been debated ad nauseum, and they are similar to the things that the Allies could have done to stop the genocide in World War II that my grandparents survived. But none of them were implemented. Not a single one. So Falling Whistles was born in response. We started with this story of a single day, the Falling Whistles Journal. Our founders 3 years ago started hawking whistles out of their pockets, out of a garage in Venice Beach, asking people to wear their protest and to be whistleblowers for peace. So 3 years later, our coalition is 50,000 strong, and it includes club promoters in Brooklyn and high school students in East LA, university students in Muncie, fashion designers in Stockholm. It includes, soccer moms in Alabama. Now together, what we are finally doing is funding the dreams of 7 Congolese visionaries who are rebuilding their own country. And we continue pressing the Obama administration to finally end our world's deadliest war. I note that in 2006, as a senator, President Barack Obama wrote a beautiful piece of legislation that was passed, and signed into law by President Bush, which outlines some of those cheap and painless options that could bring the crisis in Congo to an end. Very few of those recommendations that he made as a senator have yet to be implemented. So it's actually not that hard for the APB to make real progress right now. Congo's national government is dependent on the US and other Western donors for 40% of its annual operating budget. President Kabila stole his way to a second term through a rigged vote in November. His government depends on us, and he is desperate for legitimacy in a continent that's quickly filling up with democracies. So all it's really going to take to make progress is some creative diplomacy. There are so many tools at our disposal, and I saw represented in the faces of the Atrocities Prevention Board every single one of those tools. With a little imagination, we can get a warlord like Bosco Ntaganda thrown into jail, and we can help Congo build an army that protects its people instead of preying on them. With a little nerve, we can demand accountability for the billions of dollars that the international community pumps into the Congo's national treasury every year. Now, to do this, we're probably going to have to freeze the assets of some very important people. We may need to throw elbows at our regional allies, and we'll certainly need to coordinate more closely with our European and our Chinese partners. But if I could ask anything of the APB, it's this: it's get creative. Historically, it's been a lack of imagination, especially on the diplomatic front, that has gotten in the way of effective intervention. Career Foreign Service officers are trained and conditioned to pursue stability at all costs, usually at the expense of genuine peace or justice. Now, stability often includes an implied endorsement of dictatorship, which has never saved a single life, and we have seen the consequences of endorsing dictatorship in Egypt, in Libya, and in Syria, and we see it in the Democratic Republic of Congo today. Now, change that. Change this default to stability and get your diplomats to be creative, and I really think that the APB will move our foreign policy machine from paralysis to action. In 3 months, I'm going to become the mother to a baby boy, and I desperately hope that when he's 12 years old, he doesn't find himself in the same shoes that I found myself in 18 years ago.
Thank you. So we're going to turn next to Stacy Burdett of the Anti-Defamation League, and I think it's particularly appropriate to have Stacy on the panel because they really do a great job focusing on anti-Semitism and also hate. And we know from the Rwandan case that Monique's talked about, and really virtually any other case of mass killing, that hate speech is a critical ingredient there. And if you go to the museum today, you go through our propaganda exhibit, you'll see the way the Nazis spent, 8 years dehumanizing Jews before the killing began. So, Stacy, good to see you.
Thank you. I'm grateful that the President and Samantha and the White House have used this day really to invite the American people in to experience the convergence between Holocaust remembrance and genocide prevention. And that link has always been there, and it's as it should be. And even before the Holocaust, and certainly in its aftermath, the Jewish people have been very, very invested in elevating genocide prevention into the mainstream of international diplomacy and world affairs. So today is really a very fitting way to make that link. And I think for Jewish Americans, people like me whose parents or grandparents lived in this country during the Holocaust, in my case, literally up the street, for us, never again is never again feeling alienated from conversations in the halls of power that can save lives, that can engage and interrupt atrocities in the way that could have been done before the Holocaust. And so, Samantha, this conversation today is already a beginning. It's already a fulfillment of part of the pledge of never again. At the Anti-Defamation League, we work at interrupting bias at the very beginning. So we work in a very early intervention stage in the process. The President spoke very eloquently to the fact that genocide is really born in the hearts of men and women. And we all know the saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And we all understand that that's not true, and that there is a pattern of escalation. And at the ADL, our methodology and our programming is based around something we call the pyramid of hate. And we know that bias is a foundation for prejudice, is a foundation for discrimination, is a foundation for hate, violence, bias-motivated violence, and the top of the pyramid is genocide. And the top of the pyramid rests on the other foundations. And I would really encourage the board also to, as you engage with your colleagues in other agencies, also to look upstream and to think about prevention in the earlier stages of bias. And I think the President also talked about how acceptance of intolerance, enabling intolerance, and discrimination really trains good people to think of someone else as less deserving of rights and protection, and that's where it starts. So we are working at this very early stage. We do a lot of work to empower youth to stand up. When someone says, don't tell anybody about what you saw or this remark, or it's not something you should talk about in polite conversation, we empower kids to say, no, I'm going to tell everybody. I am going to interrupt bias and bullying. And I think we know that hate crime, hate violence in every country in the world is an indicator, a precondition for genocide. So sometimes it's state-sponsored discrimination, and sometimes it's just the everyday harassment of hate turning to violence and polarization of communities. We work a lot with law enforcement, and there's a tremendous amount of reach that our government has in terms of training law enforcement, sensitizing law enforcement in other countries around the world through training programs to recognize the indicators and to know how to address bias, hate violence. Again, that ultimately is part of that process of escalation. It's been asked, how did good people allow the Holocaust to happen? And I think there are as many answers to that question as there are people who answer it. But one thing we do know is that everywhere that good people stood up and said no and did what we all do as advocates, got in the way and interrupted, everywhere that happened, Jewish people lived, gay people lived, Roma people lived. And We know that even after the Holocaust, unfortunately, genocide is possible. But this work and the efforts of the Atrocity Prevention Board are premised on a belief that it's not inevitable. It doesn't have to end this way. And I think, you know, the president talked about this as well. The world watched the Holocaust happen, and our hope is that the world is watching today at events around us, but watching in a very different way. Watching with an understanding that we have individual and collective choices to make about how we respond, and those choices really matter. So hopefully we'll continue this discussion during question and answer.
So thank you, Stacy. And our final speaker is Daniel Solomon from STAND and one of the rising young leaders in the genocide prevention movement. We're glad to have you.
Thanks. I'm trying my best. It's not often that a 21-year-old has the opportunity to speak in front of a group of some of the most impressive practitioners and policymakers in the atrocities prevention field. And so I want to thank Mike and the White House, and especially Samantha, for the opportunity to speak on this panel and to give a little bit of perspective into what STAND is doing to, you know, play our part in pushing atrocities prevention forward for the next generation. And STAND is a student political constituency organization that's focused on providing youth and students with the resources, opportunities, and tools needed to mobilize their local communities to advocate for atrocities prevention and civilian protection in U.S. foreign policy. And we were founded in 2004 in response to the genocide in Darfur, which Omer talked about, and we've heard about throughout the course of today. And we spent a number of years trying to mobilize student constituencies to really drive change and affect change in U.S. foreign policy to change the situation in Darfur. And we realized both the power of the student constituency as well as the woeful inadequacy of students in mobilizing change in U.S. foreign policy. And so it required a little bit of a strategic rethink in terms of the way that we think of the role of students and the role of youth advocates in pushing the atrocities prevention agenda forward. And so one of the things I think we need to focus on as youth advocates especially is thinking about the change that we make, not only in terms of the success of tomorrow's lobby meeting, but also the success of our advocacy 15, 20 years down the line. Ultimately, our success as advocates will not be determined by the number of bills that we pass, but by the number of people who 20 years from now are sitting up here on this stage working as members of the Atrocities Prevention Board for future administrations. And I think that's an important lesson that, thank you. Took a second to get the parallelism in there. But I think that's an important lesson that we need to think about going forward is how do we create this second generation of youth advocates. And Monique touched on something that I think is really important to consider, which is the importance of being creative and the importance of providing innovative solutions to the crises that we face as youth advocates. And I'd like to talk briefly about some ways that STAND is doing that. So just to touch on 2 points, one of the ways that we're trying to create a new future for atrocities prevention is by building new constituencies in the United States and working with new organizations as well as old organizations that we haven't reached out to yet that are working on this issue, that are mobilizing their constituencies to try to make change in their own communities, and especially to empower new voices who can really bring something to the table in terms of changing the narratives that we seek to empower. And one of the ways that we're doing that is through creating strategic partnerships with diaspora organizations, working with the Sudanese diaspora to organize lobby meetings around the current Sudan legislation on the Hill, working with members of the Congolese diaspora to advocate for more responsible university policies on mineral extraction and violence in the DRC, and working with other constituencies from conflict-affected states so that we can change the narratives that we provide into narratives of empathy and empowerment rather than sympathy and condescension. And another way that I think is important for us to engage is by starting to think about ways that we can expand the U.S. constituency and start building movements across the country and across the world that will advocate for atrocities prevention 15, 20 years down the line. Because I think one of the conclusions that I've reached after rereading Samantha's book in this age of multipolarity is the fact that U.S. policy can make a difference. The Atrocities Prevention Board will make a difference, but we need atrocities prevention boards in Brazil. We need atrocities prevention boards in South Africa. We need atrocities prevention boards in areas of the world that haven't prioritized atrocities prevention, but that are engaging in these norms of the responsibility to protect, that are engaging in norms of civilian protection that we can leverage to make our policies more effective. So we need to focus on building those constituencies, building communities of conscience in emerging societies and in democratizing states so that we can engage students throughout the world and make the solution to a world without genocide actually a global solution. So I encourage you to check out our website, standnow.org, and just contact me afterwards if you're interested in engaging in this exciting new project.
So I think we're kind of behind, but we have about 10 minutes for questions, so comments, and hopefully some people in the Twitterverse will weigh in too. There, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Sharon Silber. I'm from Jews Against Genocide, a member group of Act for Sudan, and I'm the daughter of a father who was the only member of his family to survive the Holocaust. And I'm going to respond to Mr. Abramowitz's call from the president to speak out. And so I just want to make a short statement about Sudan. As you all know, in the past 10 months, sorry, I have to put my glasses on. In the past 10 months, the government of Sudan has attacked civilians in the Blue Nile and Nuba Mountains region on the basis of ethnicity. They have killed people through indiscriminate aerial bombardment of civilians, and right now hundreds of thousands of people are on the verge of ethnically defined starvation. The Enough Project has documented, as you well know, the presence of mass graves in these areas. In the past month, we have gotten some very disturbing reports. On April 8th, Sudan stripped 700,000 Southern Sudanese of their citizenship on the basis, again, of ethnicity, without a word from the US government or European governments. How can we not be reminded of the Nuremberg laws of 1935 when we hear these things? Yesterday, a southern Christian church in Khartoum was burnt to the ground by an angry mob. How can we not be reminded of the attacks on our houses of worship in those terrible times more than 70 years ago? And today, Omar al-Bashir, the president of Sudan, referred to the African tribes of Sudan as insects that need to be annihilated.
Sharon, hi. Sorry.
I just want to say that I don't think we have the right to use the words never again.
You know, I think there's going to be a session on Sudan. I think there's going to be a full and frank discussion of these issues. I'd like to just give other people a chance to make a question before I give the panelists one final opportunity.
Thank you. My name is Anderson Kirui. Originally, I am from Kenya. And I just wanted to commend everybody, the panels, the two panels. I think we are headed in a very good direction. I used to hear about disaster preparedness. Now we're hearing about actually proactive ways of dealing and making sure that this does not happen again. I just wanted to, coming from a country that we are surrounded by Somalia on the west, and then on the north we have Sudan. We see an unprecedented influx of foreigners that have come and threatened the peace in the country that has always been in peace. So when I hear about intelligence, I just wanted to comment and say that this is where the panel needs to input a lot of input, because the porous border is where the problem is. So we lack a lot of intelligence, and this being a preventive measures that we're doing, I just wanted to throw that out there to say that intelligence is very key, especially that we're preventing. We have a country that has the potential of going back, of going to the rest of Africa. So I just wanted to throw that out there to say it's very key. One more thing that I didn't hear from the panel, sorry, I'm taking a lot of time, is the political aspect, where we tackle those who are in power, because if you see where all these things have started is during the transition period. So if we are going to tackle this problem without going, without having an approach of a political approach, our efforts might not give a lot of results. So I just wanted to throw out there again that there's a lot of need to even go into the politics. I know the U.S. government might not want to involve themselves in politics, but that is a very, very big aspect where those in power will use all kinds of machinery to disturb peace. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So I also wanted to read a question we had from a follower on Twitter, a good question, which is, as civilians, how can we push the government to appropriately label instances of mass atrocity or genocide in order to react properly? And for people following online, remember to use the hashtag WHChat. So why don't I take one more question? I saw, yes, you, sir, and then I'll give the panelists a chance to react.
Thank you very much. My name is Norbert Mao from Uganda, northern Uganda. You'll probably remember me better if I say I was a presidential candidate in Uganda in the last election. It was your own President Woodrow Wilson who said the ears of the leader must ring with the voices of the people. Today, as I listened to President Obama, I came out convinced that his ear was ringing with our voices, we the war victims. And I would like to add the following to the comments. First, we, the leaders in Africa, strongly support this initiative. The Atrocities Prevention Board is a warning to perpetrators of atrocities that it's going to be very risky. I came here to support the work of Invisible Children and to lobby the powers that be here to sustain the good actions in an election year. The Atrocities Prevention Board is also a message to victims of atrocities that you are not alone. I think that is very good. About 8 years ago, I listened to Samantha speaking at a testimony in Congress, and General Delaya was there. So I have a question. I don't know who will take it. It should have been members of the board, especially those from UN. This question of mandate. General Delaya said he had the capability to at least stop or slow down those who were killing people in Rwanda, but he had orders not to do it. Now, the US government has sent special forces to Central Africa. We are told that they are there to support the regional forces. They don't have instructions to take any action, military action, though they are combat ready. So my question then is, would you deploy a lifeguard and give them instructions not to get into the water?
Okay, thank you all for your
Thank you.
questions and comments. I just wanted to remind everybody that we are running a little bit behind, and so if you can keep your questions and comments, but I'll turn it back over to Mike to wrap up and some of the panelists to comment. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, so a lot of stuff was just put on the table, which I can't hope to summarize, but I'm going to turn to Omer first because I think he's on the panel as the one who's most knowledgeable about Sudan, and that's, you might want to just address Sharon's question.
Yeah, there are many challenges in Sudan, and Sharon, we all know what is going on in Sudan, and these people definitely know. The political issues are there, the leverage issues are there. However, I think it is important for us to remember that the atrocities that happened in Darfur and before that happened in South Sudan, now they are duplicated in the Nuba Mountains and the Blue Nile. Yes, many activists and many people out there were frustrated with the response of the international community, but I think today we have a good response. Yes, a lot of people criticize the United States, and many Sudanese, I'm among them, see that they were always excuses not to act, and they was particularly blame on the intelligence community and the Department of Defense that they are hiding behind the cooperation between the government of Sudan and the US in security and in the war on terrorism. But we think that terrorism is al-Bashir himself. And he was the one who aided and abetted terrorism. And still the government of Sudan did not give away their methods of relying on these fundamentalists across the region in achieving their agenda. I think this is a good opening for us to work with this wonderful panel so that we together, Sharon and everyone else out there, we work with them, give them the right information, work with them on the right policies. I think their doors are open, and this is the first meeting for them today, and now we are with them. I think the doors are open. The onus is on us to come back and to say, this is what we want you to do. We are going to hold you responsible if you don't do this, and work with them so that we can achieve our goals. It will take more than a lot of us coming together to end this. It is not just the responsibility of the US government, it is the responsibility of us, and also the suggestion that we engage Europe, the rest of Africa, Latin America, because those people who think that this is far away from them, watch out, because we thought it was far away from us until we saw it knocking on our doors.
Okay, you know, I think I'm going to have to wrap the panel up with apologies to my fellow panelists. I thought you made great presentations, but I think we're falling behind. So I think we're going to turn next to technology. Thank you very much.